Good evening and welcome to the Capitol Report on NTD Television. I'm Steve Lance. Coming up, President Trump announcing a trade framework with China as the deal pens approval. How much tariffs he wants to impose, and the White House's warning to anti-ICE protests popping up throughout the country. And how well has the media covered the riots in Los Angeles? And how have different responses to protests nationwide yielded different outcomes in other states? We'll hear from Bill O'Reilly, host of the No Spin News. Tech billionaire Elon Musk saying he regrets recent posts about President Trump, saying they went too far. So where does this relationship stand now?
This is Capitol Report, live from our global headquarters in our nation's capital. Here's Steve Lance.
President Trump now reviewing the details of a trade framework between the United States and China, as his final approval for a potential deal is still pending. The White House issuing a stern warning as anti-ICE protests spread to other cities across the country. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao has more.
A day after U.S. trade teams finished their talks with China in London, the White House says President Trump likes what he heard from his team and is now reviewing the framework, which includes China releasing critical minerals to the U.S.
But what the president heard, he liked. China has agreed to open their markets to the United States separately of this deal.
President Trump on Wednesday announced that a deal with China is done and subject to final approval by himself and Xi Jinping. Trump says as part of the framework discussed, China has agreed to supply the U.S. up front with full magnets and any necessary rare earths. The U.S. will provide to China what was agreed to, including student access to U.S. colleges. On tariffs, Trump says the U.S. will impose a 55% tariffs on China, while China will have a 10% tariff on the U.S.
If China will course correct by upholding its end of the initial trade agreement we
Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, though, today emphasizing that China needs to course correct and become a reliable partner in trade negotiations. The administration has previously accused China of repeating its history of violating trade deals, including by restricting exports of rare earth minerals to the U.S. It remains to be seen if this time around China will keep its word. Meanwhile, anti-ICE protests like those in LA are now spreading to major cities like New York, Chicago, Austin, and Washington, D.C. And Texas is deploying the National Guard, and more protests are planned for upcoming days. The White House today issuing a stern warning
to left-wing radicals in other parts of the country who are thinking about copycatting the violence in an effort to stop this administration's mass deportation efforts. You will not succeed.
Trump has deployed hundreds of Marines and around 4,000 National Guard troops to LA. That's despite pushback from Democratic leaders. California Governor Gavin Newsom has sued the administration, accusing it of overreach.
Democracy is under assault.
And the Chicago mayor today called Trump an authoritarian
who take advantage to ultimately repress all protesters.
The White House, though, emphasizing today that the president supports peaceful protests, just not violent ones.
He supports the First Amendment. He does not support assaulting law enforcement officers.
So if there were peaceful protests on Saturday for the military parade, President Trump would allow that?
Of course the president supports peaceful protests. What a stupid question.
And as more protesters are planning rallies here in Washington, D.C. around this Saturday's military parade, President Trump has warned that they will be met with heavy force. Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, NTD News.
The U.S. today reportedly preparing a partial evacuation of its Iraqi embassy in Baghdad. Reports citing several Trump administration officials suggest the move is due to growing security concerns in the Middle East. Iraq, of course, sharing a vast border with Iran. According to the Associated Press, the order covers only non-essential personnel at the embassy. Aside from that, the military is also offering voluntary departure for family members of active duty troops stationed in the region. The Trump administration is working to negotiate a deal aimed at stopping Iran's nuclear development. So far, both sides have held 5 rounds of talks, but President Trump today saying he's less confident about the regime's compliance. Iran's defense minister recently threatening to attack U.S. military bases if conflict breaks out over the deal. A deadline for the deal is set to expire this week. Today, the defense secretary confirming that Iran is actively working toward a nuclear weapon. That's according to an X post from Senator Tom Cotton. Cotton added, quote, "For the sake of our national security, the security of our allies, and millions of civilians in the region, this cannot be allowed to happen." And as the Los Angeles riots have sparked protest around the country, how does the reaction to the National Guard's presence in California compare to that of Texas, where Governor Abbott is deploying troops? Joining me now to discuss these latest developments is host of No Spin News, Bill O'Reilly. Bill O'Reilly, great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me in, Steve.
It's great to have you back, Bill. So let's start with the unrest in Los Angeles, now spreading throughout the country, for that matter. What would you say the media is ultimately failing to cover about this?
I think they're hyping it up. It doesn't seem to be an organic display of protest. That means that it doesn't have a constituency among regular people. The Los Angeles protesters were fueled by very militant far-left organizations that passed out masks and frozen water bottles and other forms of protection for the protesters. Same thing in New York. This is all organized by the far left, but the people aren't coming out. In fact, on Tuesday night at 9 o'clock in New York, everybody went home. In fact, I guess they were hungry. So this is kind of contrived, and the media hoped it would explode into something more so that Trump would look bad, but that doesn't seem to have been the case.
Now, as the protests do continue to spread throughout different states, I want to contrast some of the different responses we're seeing. You have Attorney General Pam Bondi asked about if Trump will step in other cities. Here's her response.
But what happened in New York was very different. NYPD came in right away. NYPD came in and shut it down. We all believe in peaceful protests. You saw New York. There were peaceful protests happening in New York. And we're going to continue to do everything we can to keep California safe if the government of California is not going to help them.
Bill, we're also seeing right now in Texas, the governor there, Greg Abbott, preemptively deploying the state's National Guard to San Antonio ahead of this weekend's protests. How does the response of local authorities shape the outcome of the unrest?
Well, I think Ms. Bondi made a very valid point that in California, Governor Newsom wanted these demonstrations to explode so he could use that as a political cudgel against Trump and elevate himself into a left-wing candidate for president in 28. And let me back that up. So when you have the police chief of Los Angeles in a press conference saying, we're outmanned, we can't control the violence, the fires on the cars, the throwing objects at our own police and ICE agents, we can't control it. And you don't have the governor immediately sending the National Guard down to help the LAPD, then you know the governor doesn't care or wants it to explode. And that's what I believe Newsom did. In New York, they didn't want it to explode, and it's easier to control it here because the city is so claustrophobic, and the cops know how to do this, and they did a good job. So they didn't give the miscreants a lot of room to set anything on fire or things like that, and you didn't need the federal presence. So each situation is different. As far as Texas is concerned, I mean, Governor Abbott is a conservative guy. He's going to hotshot the issue. I'm not criticizing him. San Antonio was kind of volatile. I don't know whether I would have done it. I would have had to look and see what the local police situation is and what the state police presence would be. But no downside for Abbott. His constituency wants a tough guy approach, and that's what he did.
Now, the California governor obviously blaming Trump for deploying the National Guard, along with a lot of media. Let's take a look at what he said.
This brazen abuse of power by a sitting president inflamed a combustible situation, putting our people, our officers, and even our National Guard at risk. That's when the downward spiral began.
So we have two different frames of logic. understandings. One, that the National Guard calmed the violence in L.A., and the other, that it inflamed it. How can we evaluate which one is true?
Well, how many cars have been set on fire since the Guard got there?
Fair point.
That would be none. No, look, Newsom, anybody clear-thinking, fair, who believes that Gavin Newsom is telling the truth, what are you going to do? I mean, he is an opportunist, totally incompetent, will say and do anything to get political power, and that's what is on display. This is a big loss for Newsom. I told that to Sean Hannity on his radio program. Newsom isn't gaining any traction here at all. The far left kooks that like him are, okay. But regular folks, they know what he is. And he just keeps reinforcing that over and over and over.
Bill, lastly, while the protests are now expanding across the country, it appears, into the weekend, the United States Army is hosting a grand military parade to celebrate its 250th anniversary birthday. What do you make of the timing of these protests, and could it be priming Americans to view the parade as an authoritarian move? And what are you expecting to come out of this weekend?
Well, most Americans support the U.S. military, so that's not going to work. I hope it's a peaceful demonstration of respect toward the Army on its 250th anniversary. I suspect it will be. D.C. is a fairly easy place to control violence in a mass demonstration form. You've got to have a license to protest down there. You got a lot of federal agencies involved, Secret Service, FBI, a whole bunch of people. They'll be ready. And I don't think the protests are going to get anywhere near the parade site. So I'm not real worried about that. And I don't believe that this ICE protest is going to carry on until next week. I think it's going to die out. I could be wrong on that, Steve, but it doesn't look like it has legs to me.
Host of No Spin News, Bill O'Reilly, appreciate you joining us.
Thanks for having me.
The House of Representatives narrowly passing a procedural hurdle that clears the way for the rescissions package requested by President Trump. House Republicans vow it will be the first of many clawbacks. Our Washington correspondent, Louise Martinez, joins us live in studio to break down what the rescissions are and their impact. Louise, it's great to have you back in studio with us. So, first of all, what are these rescissions packages that we're hearing about, and why did the White House ultimately request it from Congress?
So these rescission packages are actually the DOGE spending cuts. So the Department of Government Efficiency found over $150 billion of spending cuts, but they recommended the administration to have these spending cuts. Now, for this year, this fiscal year 2025, the Congress has already appropriated the money, and the rescissions package allows Congress to claw back that money. So this first package is $9.3 billion. It will be targeting PBS, NPR, and foreign aid programs within USAID. And it's the first test because, of course, like I just mentioned, it's over $150 billion that DOGE recommended be clawed back. This is just the first package. It cleared a procedural hurdle, so it's on its way to being passed.
Now, how do these rescissions impact, not to be confused with what we're calling reconciliation negotiations, and the negotiations? These are the negotiations for Trump's big, beautiful bill, as he calls it.
Of course. So the big, beautiful bill, the reconciliation, is now being debated in the Senate. But there's a lot of Senate Republicans, also House Republicans, who want to see larger spending cuts. So one would think that the rescissions packages, these clawbacks of money that has already been appropriated, would help. But let's listen to what Congressman Thomas Massie, who voted no on the rescissions package and voted no on the reconciliation bill, had to say about this.
Do you think the rescissions package will help unlock some of the deadlock and the reconciliation negotiations?
I think they're decoupled. I mean, the rescissions are great. I'm going to vote for them, but it's $9 billion so far, the package we have. And these are billion-dollar answers to trillion-dollar problems. In reconciliation, we have trillion-dollar problems. In rescissions, we have billion-dollar savings.
So yeah, Thomas Massie actually ended up voting no for that rescissions package, but he's making the comparison, $9.4 billion, nothing close to what he wants to see, which is over $1.5 trillion in spending cuts.
Now, during these negotiations, from what I understand, Democrats are not in the picture. House Republicans have begun this week marking up the appropriations bills for fiscal year 2026. Will Republicans be able to pass a budget without Democrats?
That's a very interesting point. So for reconciliation, that big, beautiful bill, and the rescissions package, Republicans don't need Democrats. So they can pass that with a simple majority in the House and in the Senate. But for the appropriation bills for fiscal year 2026, or the budget for next year, they will need Senate Democrats, at least 7 of them. So it's going to be interesting when we reach the end of September where that budget needs to be approved, whether Democrats will support Republican budget or they'll force a government shutdown.
There's going to be some angry constituents on maybe both sides, but certainly one or the other. We'll be keeping an eye. Luis Martinez, thanks so much. Elon Musk steps back from his recent feud with President Trump, saying on X that he regrets some of his recent posts about the president. Musk writing on his social media platform, X, quote, "I regret some of my posts about President Donald Trump last week. They went too far." He did not say which specific post he was talking about, though he has deleted several that were critical of the president. One of those signaled support for impeaching Trump. In a phone conversation with the New York Post, Trump commented on Musk's apology, saying, quote, "I thought it was very nice that he did that." Coming up, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent testifying before Congress about trade talks with China. He says China has proven to be an unreliable partner in the past. And as protests flare up over President Trump's immigration policies, we'll hear from the folks in Washington, D.C. about the latest unrest and how states and federal governments are responding. That and more when we return.
250 years of valor, honor, and sacrifice. A parade celebrating the birth of the U.S. Army in our nation's capital, showcasing America's military might.
This parade salutes our soldiers' remarkable strength and unbeatable spirit. You won't want to miss it.
Tune in for our live special coverage Saturday, June 14th, 5:30 p.m. Eastern.